Hello, it's Peter Merrick, and I am so excited because we're speaking with Laura Bolton. She's in the Yucatan, she's in Mexico. She is a British citizen. She's decided during this, I don't know what word to use, transition, maybe some people would say evil, apocalypse, whatever you want, to leave the rain to the sun. And we're going to be talking about her work, which is working with people who are awakening to actually become more awake. And that's actually going within and having introspection, because as those of us who are asking deeper and deeper questions, we find out there's more questions. And sometimes when you're going through it the first time, it's disturbing, it's lonely. No one else can help you go through those changes. And I'm excited for wherever this interview goes, because transition is the only way for growth. Laura, thank you so much for joining me.
It's great to be here. I'm looking forward to having a chat with you, and who knows where it will go, but I'm excited.
Those are the best conversations. Those are like not being scripted. So your voice was taken away from you on LinkedIn.
Oh yeah. It's not my first rodeo. I mean, well, on LinkedIn it is, because I've not been, I actually have not, until more recently, until a few weeks ago, I hadn't been using LinkedIn for probably 3 years. I just didn't bother using it. I was more, especially early 2020 onwards, I was kind of Facebook and Instagram and then Telegram. And so I didn't use it. And then more recently I thought, like, yeah, I feel like kind of getting back on the LinkedIn. And then I've had crazy censorship on Facebook in 2020, and then on Instagram, although these days my stuff's not quite as controversial because it's more about the inner work. So I kind of escape with a little bit of shadow banning there. But yeah, I get back onto LinkedIn and I share a few posts, and I'm making new connections, like who are more aligned.
Laura, I'd love to hear your story, again, your story to awaken, to question, and also about building communities.
Yeah, sure. Change is possible for everybody. Like we all have the ability to do it. We just have to be, willing. And yes, I have been through it all. I mean, we haven't talked about my whole journey, but I've, not only have I had, the awakening, I've had the health issues, I've been, I've lost my business, I've been homeless, I've been rock bottom, I've had zero money, I've been like literally the absolute worst that I could ever imagine. And look at me now. Like there is nothing that you can't do when you really have the willingness, and you're willing to also ask for help and to be willing to receive help. Well, I'll just tell you a little bit about, I guess, the last few years, which has really been my awakening journey. It's kind of happened in stages. So I guess my first sense of awakening was several years ago. We're going back probably eight years now. And I was in the corporate world. I was working as a change management consultant, and I had lots of health issues. So I had like lots of physical issues, anxiety, depression, just a whole host of things. And I wasn't getting any results from, seeing a conventional doctor. They were just prescribing me things and telling me that, diet didn't have anything to do with it, and my lifestyle didn't really have anything to do with it. And it was just one of these things. And so at that time, I discovered functional medicine and more holistic medicine, and started to, stop taking any kind of medical pharmaceuticals, and started to really address my health, you know, on a on various levels, but very totally naturally and holistically. And through that process, I started learning about the reality of the allopathic, you know, traditional medicine model that we have, and the pharmaceutical industry. And so that was kind of my first, I guess, delve into the rabbit hole, so to speak. I started really learning about, you know, the whole kind of industrial medical complex, and how, you know, it's, you know, for money, and how controlled it is, and how, you know, everything kind of links together. And it was really strange, because it just made sense. And I remember thinking to myself, how did I not see this before? Like, how have I gone through my whole life and just not seen it? And I think sometimes we just have to be presented with a different view, and a kind of portal to enter, you know, if we're in that space where we're open and willing to actually, you know, go down there. And so that was really my main thing at that time. It was health. And so I healed myself naturally. I kind of retrained and became a high performance health coach. So that was, you know, I left my corporate career. I sold my house. I just changed everything, because I realized that, you know, my health was the most important thing, and that I actually wasn't happy. Like all of my life, I've had this sense of being out of place and something not being right. And many people, I think most people who are kind of what we would consider awake, have had those kinds of experiences. And so, yeah, I just felt something wasn't right. And it was like I was just trapped in something. And so I kind of freed myself from that, started working for myself. And I was doing that for a few years until, and I didn't really go that much further down. I didn't go really much further down the rabbit hole into like all the different parts. It was more around the kind of health side of things. And then interestingly, in early 2020, I got just this really strong feeling that I needed to come to Mexico and spend some time in Mexico. And so I followed that feeling. And this is kind of how I live. I sort of follow my heart and my inner wisdom. And I came to Mexico, and about 3 weeks after I arrived, they, you know, announced this big thing that was happening. And we all know what that is. And, you know, people, my friends in other countries were saying, oh gosh, don't come here, don't come back here, stay in Mexico. It's probably the best place to be. And something strange happened to me. It was like, I just knew immediately this was all a big engineered scam. I just knew it. And it was like, the only way I can describe it, it was like something was activated in me. It was like just this thing within, I just knew. And I just had this kind of energy to not only dive deeper into the rabbit hole, into all of the aspects, but to start sharing about it and speaking up. And that was something very new for me. And it's something that I talk about quite a lot, about being able to, you know, once you know, it's all well and good being awake, but then you have to get out of bed. You know, you have to actually get up and do something. And I think, you know, there's many people I know who are still kind of stuck in that awareness, but too frightened to make changes and too frightened to actually speak up. And there's, you know, reasons for that we could explore. But I, you know, having been previously someone who was pretty shy, I didn't really, you know, I was just sharing my health stuff online and just kind of being me. And all of a sudden I start sharing all this stuff. It was initially on Facebook. People who, you know, knew me at that time, many of them were shocked because I'd never spoken about kind of out there things before. And it was pretty brutal. You know, it was, people were angry at me for sharing what I was sharing. They were criticizing me, ridiculing me. I even had people messaging me, wishing me death. And it was a really wild experience because I wasn't really expecting it. I was like, surely everyone can see this. Like,
well, that's the interesting part, that we all had wake up moments. You know, we had like pattern interruptions in our lives. And I shared with you, I'm working on my 5th book. I'm calling it The Dot Collectors. And it really came about because a friend of mine who's a Canadian exile in the Dominican Republic said, Peter, when did you have your wake up call? You know, like what moment? And then I thought about it and I said, well, that particular moment, things might have opened up, but that was connected to another moment prior to that, and another moment, and another moment, and listening to other people's stories. And what I realized, and you know, I'm going to ask if you agree or not, or to elaborate, is most people who are awake, they've always been somewhat independent. They're not posse girls or boys. That's one. They have phenomenal memories. And what I discovered, and this is myself, and this is the analogy, I was really good at collecting information and utilizing it for my own uses, because I would use the analogy of the swimming pool. Someone jumps in the pool and I need to know enough that I step aside, that I don't get wet. And that's how I dealt my whole life. The reason I feel that I have to speak in other people who are being called to speak, like yourself, is it doesn't matter where you move, you're going to get wet. So you better do something, and you're going to have to stop the person from jumping in the pool. And that could be WEF, and that could be the UN, and that could be the Rockefeller Foundation. And that's educating people, because there's no way of getting out of it now. And I think that's the big lesson that's woke me up. Like, I can speak, you can speak. There's a good possibility that if we don't speak, we won't have a voice later on, and we will regret not speaking. And for me, it's not a choice, it's a survival, and it's selfish. Because if I don't speak out and other people don't speak out, we're all in trouble. And there's a saying that I keep on saying to myself is, courage is contagious. You speak out, other people will speak out. And maybe there'll be a phase transition in society and it all ends. And we start laughing. Before I go forward, I saw the greatest way to actually deal with this insanity. When the red speech was given with the commander in chief, the one who got the 81 million votes, Tucker Carlson, I don't watch him that much anymore, but all he did was laugh. All he did was like laugh, and he just like made fun of these people in the situation, and it took away their power. And that's all you can do is laugh at them, and just comedy. And people don't understand, in the male archetypes, the top archetype is the gesture, the court joker, who can go and make fun of the king, but make strong points. And that might actually get people to like, because if we're all serious, no one's really going to like, yeah, there's some really crazy things that can make you cry. Like, have you cried during this moment, like during this time? Like about like, you know, this craziness? Like, I had a friend who killed himself last
me
year.
too.
Laura, you left England to Mexico just before the Great Change, the Great Reset.
Yes.
And why did you choose to go to the Yucatan?
So I'm on the coast near to Cancun.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I just felt to go there. Like, there was no logical reason for it. I didn't know anybody here. I just felt to come here, and it was the right decision, because it's been pretty easy living here compared to many other places in the rest of the world. I mean, we had a few months initially of lockdown, as everywhere did, but after a few months, everything just reopened, and everything was, relatively normal in this part of Mexico. It's not like that in all of Mexico. There's parts of Mexico where it's a lot worse. But yeah, I'm glad that I came to this part and at that time.
So my question is, were they wearing the face nappy everywhere? Even
Of
though they
course.
were locked?
I mean, of course, was there any country in the world where people weren't? I mean, it's I think, you know, that particularly that first kind of lockdown, that first few months, you know, I can understand it. I think at the early stage, I can understand why people will comply. I mean, it's human psychology, and as you probably well know, all of this stuff is purposefully done with very, very intricate understandings of human psychology. It's a psychological operation. So of course, this stuff has been studied, how to get people to comply. And I get why the majority would comply at the very start. I think what's been quite fascinating is how many continue to comply, you know, a year, 2 years and counting later.
Yes.
It's wild. And, you know, and as you were saying, I say I'm laughing my way through the apocalypse because I think it's important to see the funny side of it. And that's not the same as laughing at people. It's not, you know, laughing at people's misfortune or laughing at the fact that they're asleep. It's just laughing at the lunacy of the entire thing. And when you're able to see the big picture and you're able to see all the different things happening and how it's happening and why it's happening, some of it is so crazy. Like if you'd shown people what was happening now 3 years ago, like, and said like, oh, this is what's going to be happening in the future, nearly everyone would say that's ridiculous. That will never happen. That's completely crazy. And it just feels like it keeps getting crazier. And I joke that I feel like I'm watching a really bad comedy movie. There is a very different energy in that when you can laugh at something and you're not attached to it in kind of anger and like, you know, you're not kind of allowing it to control you, and you can just laugh at something. It takes the energy away. It's like if you know, at school when someone's bullying you, if you just kind of laugh at them or you just don't give them any attention, that's very different to trying to kind of like fight and getting really upset about it. So it is a very different energy. And I just look at, you know, every day I sort of see, you know, people sharing stuff about what's going on. And I just think, wow, this is the greatest show on earth.
I've learned some rules that I didn't know before.
Mm-hmm.
One rule is this is a magical place. So the greatest trick when they say the devil ever played is that he didn't exist. I believe it's bigger than that. I believe God didn't exist. All these things that I never, you know, would even walk down and even ask questions, because the question I would ask is, why do I believe what I believe? And then you start going that and you say, well, why can't I even go through that door? I did a really interesting interview recently with a friend of mine. He was the co-founder of Greenpeace, but everyone turned on him. It was Patrick Moore, because he was the only person who ever grew up and lived in the environment. Everyone else was a city dweller. He was the only one who had a science, like a PhD in science. And he was very interested in stewardship. And then you had the Club of Rome and all these groups got involved in the environmental movement and it became anti-human. And I asked him a question. I said, Patrick, how did you survive? Because for 30 years, your closest friends turned on you, because I was interviewing for that purpose. Yeah. He shared with me all he has is his intuition. He's able to tell whether he's speaking to a real person or someone who has other motives. And one of the conclusions that I've come to, and this has to do with my own journey, which was very painful, is realizing that all the labels that I had, it was my religion or my identity was I was a materialist, and everyone who surrounded, didn't matter whether they were Hindu, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, they were all materialists. And our religion was materialism, and not realizing that this is a magical place and that you and I and everybody is more powerful. And that's what they're scared of. that we discover how powerful we are. And
Yep.
I asked one question that actually puts everything in perspective. And I have to laugh when I ask it, but it makes complete sense. If I was a devil, what would I do? And then everything makes sense. This is why they're doing that. Like what? If I was the devil, I would go and put these people out there. And I said, when you make your money, you have to put it back, and you have to be out there so everyone can hate you. If anyone, have you ever read Saul Alinsky, Rules for Radicals?
Mm-hmm.
So he goes and says, you have to have a person that everyone focuses on. So if I'm the devil and I don't want anyone to focus on me, I would want to go and create these people so they would put their hate. And I also think that the Orange Man is also part of it, because if you do some digging into his story, he declared personal bankruptcy in 1999. $1 billion that he personally owned, and his company's over $3 billion. That's $4 billion. No one's recovers from that, but they came and they said he was better, he was more useful to them, not bankrupt. So he would disappear. So he became a spokesman. And when you start looking at this and you step back, you say, this is a great show.
Yeah, well, it is. And it's all, I think when you join the dots and you think critically, and, it takes time and it takes, effort, and you have to think, and you start to see all these different things, and you kind of use your higher mental faculties, and you're joining the dots, you start to see that there is a much kind of bigger plan, and the control structure is not as you thought it was. Most people think, oh, the politicians are the highest ones and they just govern everything. And it's like, no, the politicians are only just like down here with us almost. There's so many more structures and people and, above that. And when the bigger agendas and their global agendas, everything starts to make sense. I mean, David Icke has been saying this for 30 years.
Yes.
When you know the goals, everything makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really critical thing that a lot of people don't get. Many people who are awake are sharing knowledge, sharing information about this part and this part and this part. And to someone who's not seen the whole, and they've not seen the bigger picture and the kind of the agendas and the goals, it just doesn't make sense. And it's so confusing. And it's like, yeah, but why? That doesn't make sense. And people's minds are just frazzled.
I just want to share something. So people say to me, why would they do it? And I say, because you're psychopaths, and you're not a psychopath, so you can't think that way. Like, that's just a fact. And then I think about your royals. Even though I'm Canadian, I say they're your royals. You start looking at their story. I'm going to give an example of Prince Harry. He went to Afghanistan and he flew killer helicopters. He was actually they were feeding the British Army was feeding a bloodthirst, because he wasn't in harm's way. He was just killing innocent Afghanis. They look at us no differently than when they go on their royal estates and they probably go and they start feeding the boars and the foxes they're going to kill. And that they're pleasant, and then they kill them, and they don't even eat them. Like, we're just talking, they just don't see you and I as having any utility or value. This is what I've learned, and share with me if you agree.
I think there are, as you said, one of the big challenges is people can't, it's very difficult sometimes to relate to other people who are, say, psychopaths, and they have a very different belief system to you, because you're like, yeah, but I wouldn't do that. And so we tend to relate others, everything's relational, so we tend to relate others to ourselves. So if we can't imagine ourselves doing something, or it's too painful for us even to imagine that that's the case, we will go into cognitive, like we'll go into cognitive dissonance sometimes, where we just can't, we can't face, you know, what's happening, but also we can't imagine it. We're like, oh, my mum does that. She says, oh, but why would they do that? She says, I know I can't trust the government, but why would they want to really harm us? Like she can't get her head, she genuinely can't comprehend it, because she can't imagine what it would be like to be that, you know, to be that way. And, you know, it's like, you know, I remember when I was in university, I studied criminal psychology, and so studied the serial killers a lot. And I always remember, you know, Ted Bundy. And it was interesting because everyone thought Ted Bundy was a great guy. He was intelligent, charismatic, nice looking. People said he was kind. He was quite, you know, well-mannered. Like, and when he was accused of these things, everyone who knew him said he could not have possibly done that. Like, not at all. And so, but then it transpired that he brutally killed over 40 people.
Yeah.
So I think people really struggle to comprehend how things like that can happen. And also, you know, to think that people like him don't exist in the kind of upper echelons of the control structure. Like, that's, I mean, that's just, it's kind of, I guess, naive, but I understand it. And I think also it's important to realize that the people who want, because ultimately it's about control. They want our minds, our bodies, our souls to control everybody. It's you know, and you know, even darker than that. That is their belief system. So people that believe in, you know, it's Satanism and stuff, that is their belief system, and we all have belief systems. So they don't think that, it's not like they're sat there thinking, oh, we're doing, I don't think they're sat there thinking, oh, we're doing, you know, things which are not right, but we're going to do them anyway. They genuinely believe they're above others. They genuinely believe, you know, they need this control, and they want this control, and they've been brought up in that way. They're conditioned that way. They're conditioned into these belief structures, like we all are. You know, there's religions and different other belief systems. The whole idea of, you know, science now isn't science, it's scientism, it's a cult. But people believe it. It's another religion. It's this science religion. And so I think understanding that is very important. Not everyone is you. Not everyone does the things that you do or has the morals that you have, and different people want different things and believe in different things. And this stuff goes back like hundreds, thousands of years. You know, I always point.
We're not the first time.
No,
this isn't the first rodeo for humanity.
No, of course not. And you know, it isn't just something that just suddenly started 2.5 years ago. But it's so big, I think, sometimes for people to get their head around when they have no awareness of it. So to go from not being aware to suddenly learning about all this stuff is a really big jump. But I think if people can kind of understand the kind of bigger picture and the overall goals, then things make more sense. But it does require time. It does require thinking, dot connecting. And I believe that everybody is on their own path. So I believe in, you know, soul path. You know, yes, we're a human mind body, but we're also soul. And I think some people are just not at that stage. They're not in that place in their journey where they are going to see the light. And one of my friends always says, better luck next time. Because and you can't make people change. This is one of the biggest themes that I've seen in the work that I do and the kind of arena that I've been in the last 2.5 years. Everyone wants to change everyone else.
Yeah.
You need to, so there's one side that are saying, you need to get the, you know, the juice, you need to wear this, you need to do that. And then there's the other side who are saying, you need to wake up, you need to speak up, you need to stop complying. But when we pan out and look at it, it's all about control.
Yeah.
And we are looking at the people, you know, kind of orchestrating this stuff. And we say, you can't control me. Like, I don't want to be controlled. I want to be free. These people are awful because they're trying to control. Yet on the micro, we're doing the very same thing in a different way, but we're still doing the same thing. It's like humans have a need for control. Like we have a need for certainty and control, and we get very stressed when we don't have that. And that's why the inner work is so important, because a lot of you know, this need for control, some of it's kind of inbuilt as a kind of survival and safety mechanism, but a lot of it comes from trauma. So in earlier life, when we were not you know, we were not feeling safe. Many of us have nervous systems that are dysregulated, and so our body and our nervous system doesn't feel safe. And so we grapple for control. It's a subconscious thing. It's not, you know, we're not consciously trying to control people and really knowingly do that, but we are unconsciously doing it because we just have this need for things to be a certain way and to have that certainty.
Your work. Share with us specifically what your work is and the type of people who approach you.
So yeah, things have changed for me. As I said before, I was a high performance health coach until early 2020. I actually, by speaking out, I lost all my clients. And it was a blessing, because deep down I knew I was meant for something different. And so I always see everything as it's all a blessing. It's all happening for good reason, to kind of steer me on my path. And so I spent a few months really not working very much, but really getting into like what was going on and kind of sharing all of that stuff. And I found that whilst I had lost clients and I had lost lots of followers on social media, I had lost lots of friends, I'd had disputes with my family. I'm sure everyone can relate to this. Going through that process, I started to get a lot of connections and followers who were aligned with me, current me. And I started to realize, the people I'm here to serve are the ones who are on the awakening journey. They're not the people who are like, you know, fast asleep. They are the people who are somewhere in the awakening journey. And I say the journey because it isn't a clear, I don't believe awakening is you're awake or you're asleep. And we like to have those categories, you know, we like to have things as black and white, this or that. But actually I see awakening as firstly, it's a journey. It's like a continuum. There are some people who are just starting to become more aware, and there are others that have been on this journey for years and they just know all the things. And so there really is this continuum. But also there's two, I always say there's two kind of types of being awake. And one is being awake to the agendas and all the rabbit hole stuff, which is all the external stuff. And the other is the inner awakening. Many people, when we talk about awake, we're talking about the externally awake. Oh, we're aware of all the stuff that's going on. But actually, what are we? How aware are we of our own power, of our programming, of our limiting beliefs, of our trauma, of our behavior? Like, what work are we doing to address that? You know, our connection to source, our sovereignty, all of that stuff, that's all internal stuff. So there's kind of these two elements to awakening, and then it's also a continuum. So I basically, you know, help people in various different ways who are somewhere on that journey. They know what's up. They know, you know, everyone who follows me on Telegram and Instagram and stuff, they know the score. So these days I don't really spend time talking much about that because they don't really need an education in it. They're already kind of on that path. It's more for to help them to navigate this time as effectively as they can, and really be, you know, in their power, in their sovereignty, doing their inner work so that they can be resilient and they can really be in their full power. Because as you said earlier, the thing that defeats all this darkness is our power, it's our light. Like we don't get rid of darkness by just, you know, fighting it out there. Like we are so powerful. And I have this vision that kind of drives me, and it's imagine if everyone who was aware of what was going on, I say, you know, what's going on, if everyone, and there are millions, probably hundreds of millions of us, if everyone was like fully in their power and doing their inner work and really taking control of their lives and leading and shining and role modeling and inspiring, the world would change dramatically. The challenge is that many of us are not doing that. And so that's kind of the work that I do. And I do it in various ways. I have one-on-one coaching, group coaching programs, online membership community, and I do kind of workshops and mini courses and things like that. But it's all really to help people. How do I deal with this crap show, like this clown apocalypse? Like how do I navigate it and deal with all of the challenges? But it's all kind of from within, because everything starts within, and that's really, you know, the kind of part of that inner awakening.
Well, there's certain thoughts that come to mind when you say that. When Gandhi said, "Be the change you want to create," so it starts here. Before things became mandatory, or in early 2021, I tried to educate people who just were not there. Mm-hmm. And then I realized that Lao Tzu said, "The one who talks does not know, and the one who knows does not talk." So it's better to have someone look at the way that you're living, Laura, and to me, and if I like the way you are living, I'm going to ask you questions rather than someone trying to apostatize them. And that's been a big lesson with myself. And like you, I've lost tons of people. Back in Canada, in the area that I worked, I was probably one of the top 3 people in this certain part of the tax community. And I had a habit where I would, before the world blew up, someone who had helped me or helped me see further, I would go and write a review, but the reviews would be like 480 words because that's what LinkedIn would allow me to do, and I'd make an essay. And it was sort of, I got to experience something that I projected on this person, which allowed me to discover myself. So, you know, writing for me is my soul surgeon. So one of the top tax lawyers in Canada still is my LinkedIn friend, but that review that they were so proud of, it's not there. And just like you, when I started speaking out, I think my darkest hour came as my friend that I shared with you. He couldn't handle the changes. He knew exactly what was happening. He chose that he couldn't do it. He sent me texts from Mexico saying that he was too old to change and whatever. And then he went back to Canada and he took his life. In the darkest hours, he was crying because, like, everyone I knew from what I'd read, and it's not like, you know, they brought me in and they read me to what the plan was. Like, anybody did like some queries and just asked questions and went to source documents, could have found it. I lost a ton of people when I started speaking out when the truckers came. And as a Canadian, because I know you're British, I cried. Everybody I knew cried. And I'll share with you where the hope came in. I've had an opportunity to speak with people who were there. And they were telling me that they never felt a vibe like that before, ever in their life. Became friends with Laura Lynn Taylor Thompson. She is the one who kicked off the trucker event. She has a major podcast in Canada, and she was speaking to Pat King, one of the organizers, and she yells the back of the camera and she tells her husband she's going, and they're leaving Vancouver Island and they're going to drive 4,000 kilometers, 5,000 kilometers in the middle of February which if you're Canadian, like
Mm.
no one goes out at that time. And she shared with me she never felt an energy that way. And one of the things that, as I was sharing with you, I'm working on my next book, and I'm calling the dot collectors. It's not connectors, it's collectors. And the reason is you need perspective, you need experience. There's things in our lives that we took note of. And we did it, and it was just interesting dinner conversation. Something happened, you look at it. But through life, you step back and you say, oh, wow. And it's become significant. And then other people can help you expand your map because they're also collectors. And it's about sharing too. There's two types of people out there. There's someone who has insight, who has a lit candle, and they don't want to light anyone else's candle because God forbid their candle goes out. But then there's the person who, if I light your candle, then there's two candles. The light is twice as bright. So one of the insights that I'm doing my own research on it, because there's some interesting queries that I have. Years ago, I read something about the Princeton Conscious Project. Have you heard of that?
No.
And it was created by someone who was working for the CIA in the 60s and 70s on remote viewing, and they supposedly closed down the program, and Princeton took it up. What it is, they have these random number generators in about 70 different places around the world. And they started setting them up in 1998, and they found out when there was a big human event, just before it happened, the numbers statistically would line up, and it was like, statistically it was impossible. And it was happening before the event. They went crazy on 9/11. It was like 1 in 10 trillion. And anyone can go to the Princeton Conscious Project and see all their data going back 24 years. I'm interested to see what happened in Ottawa, because everyone had told me they were the biggest high like they've ever had. It was just so peaceful. And then I asked a question, and someone I knew two truckers who were right at the front. And they shared with me that 2 or 3 hours in the middle of the night, they felt the energy change, and they got in their trucks and they left. And that's when the thugs came in. One of my thoughts is they're able to monitor our chakras, our energies, and us vibrating and being together and sharing. And when we're vibrating too much, that will bring down the whole system. That's why they sent in those thugs. But to realize that we are more powerful than we can imagine. And this is a magical world. And the trick we've been played on is it's a materialistic world. And I shared with you earlier that I realized in the last 2 years I had to deal with my own shit. I was a materialist, and everybody around me was materialist. And I had attachments, and attachments kill. Attachment to your past successes, to your things, to your titles, to your accomplishments. That could be what ends you. And the reason why I'm so glad that we're talking, because the conclusion I've come to is our greatest moment is yet to be lived, or there would be no reason for us to be here.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, thank you. I mean, I agree that, I personally believe that the world is magical and there's lots of amazing things happening. And it's important to recognize that that is a perspective, that is a belief, and we get to shift our perspectives and beliefs. Someone will say to me, oh, the world's an awful place, we're all doomed, it's all dreadful, we're all going to die. And well, we all do eventually, but it's this doom and gloom. And then I will say, well, you could see it that way, or you could see it this way. And it's like, no, my way's right. And so this, again, we get into this, it's battle of egos. It's like, I think it's this way, and this is the way it is. well, no, it's just your, you know, it's just your perspective, your beliefs, your views, and all of that stuff. You know, whilst there is obviously certain things are facts. You know, if I jump off the top of a 10 floor building, I'm not gonna fly. There are certain kind of universal laws and kind of facts, but beyond that, everything is filtered through our internal system. And we all have different things within us which create, you know, kind of different results. And so I always say, you know, there are almost 8 billion different realities in this world, because everyone's idea of the reality is really created from within us. This is why you can have two people, they go and watch, I don't know, they watch the same movie, and one had an amazing time and thought it was brilliant, and the other is like, that was just awful. Or I can look at the stuff that's happening in the world and have a positive outlook on it, and others can just be absolutely devastated and think it's just the worst thing ever. It's just our internal, it's our internal filtering system. We can do things to shift that. And a lot of it is unconscious. It's in the subconscious. It's not like we consciously want to be in stress and doom and gloom and see everything terribly. But we all have programmed beliefs, and we are conditioned from birth in various different ways. We experience trauma in our early life. We experience nervous system dysregulation. We experience so many different things. It's so complicated. Every human is so unique. And so we're all in a different, no one's reality is exactly the same in every single way. Like, yeah, yours and mine are probably very aligned, and like, you know, we've got a lot more alignment with certain people, but everybody has a slightly different reality to somebody else. And it is just that, it's coming from within. We create it.
Yeah.
Like, we create it, and we've got to, I think, realize that. And that's part of this inner awakening that I feel many people who are aware of what's going on in the world are starting to experience this more of this inner awakening. We're starting to realize, I can't continue to make everything about what's going on outside. I can't continue to stay in this state of stress and just doom and gloom. Like, I need to take my power back.
I think it's actually good. I think it's good to actually have that stress, because at some point your muscles and you just can't do it anymore. It gets to the point where it has to dissipate, like those emotions. But I wanted to share with the concept that I've worked on for a number of years. And there's 3 terminologies that I focus on: synchronicity, serendipity, and synergy. And just to share with our audience, like, how I define them. Synchronicity is a casual coincidence. And the way that Carl Jung came up with that theory is, the big one is, he was fighting with Freud. It was the last meeting they had, and there was this 100-year-old cabinet that just cracked just at the moment. And he said it was emotion that must have caused it. Like, it went into the ether, it went into the 0 point, or whatever you want to call it. But he said it caused it. But it's something that happened to them. It's like, wow, that happened just at the moment that this was getting really tense. Serendipity is the belief that something's going to happen, that I am a participant, like the Heisenberg principle. And synergy is, I'm part of something, but I'm incapable, because of me being such a small little part of the infinite, to see how it is. And this is a hope I have. So if you were a liver cell, and I was a taste bud cell, and you want a carb, synchronicity would be, like, I'm hungry, and it just shows up. Oh my God, that's like a miracle that happened. Serendipity would be, you think of it, and you just know that you don't know how it works. That's the synergy. But I happen to be a taste bud cell, and I get the organism to have the carb, that you are a proactive person in your life. And that goes down to, are you a reactive person? Are you a proactive? In another life, I studied hypnosis and NLP, and I was very much into it. And I once was brought into a therapy meeting where we were working on metaphors, and this woman had come in, and she was in a terrible divorce, and her ex-husband, her estranged husband, just took advantage of her. And she uses the metaphor, he's a freight train. So the therapist, instead of asking what that means, asks, what are you? And she said, she's a tunnel. And he just goes, through her and does whatever. And she asks her to find another metaphor. And the metaphor she gives is, I'd like to be a derailer. I'd like to derail his train. And the therapist goes and has her project it forward and play it in her head. She comes back 2 months later. She's got a restraining order. She's back in university. Because no longer is she this passive force in her life where things are happening to her. She's now an active participant. She is the center stage. Like, everybody's life is important and it's a gift. And too many people, and I'm going to turn it back to you after this. What I discovered with how they got control of people is they got them to be very fearful. They were fearful of death because they never lived. So if someone's never lived, they're going to be scared of death. And the question that I learned a long time ago, when they ask older people at the end of their lives, what do you regret the most? They regret the things they didn't do, because you make it part of your narrative of things you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, there's so many things you touched on there that I could speak to. I mean, I think the last thing you mentioned about fear, yes, of course. I mean, this is fear is the ultimate form of control. So, my view is, I'm not going to have fear or give in to fear, because that is how I am controlled. And the fear can be perpetuated or created by external people and situations, but it can also be created from within us, with our thoughts, right? Just even without anyone else doing anything, we can catastrophize and create all these situations in our heads that probably won't even ever happen. And this is, and then it just creates this like sensation of fear. And what we've seen the last 2.5 years is just one big fear fest. It's fear of something making you sick, fear of actually, another fear which is worth touching on is the fear of being left out, being ostracized, not being part of the herd. And this is one of the main things that causes people to comply, in my experience, because psychologically and emotionally, we need belonging. Like, it's a fundamental need, this connection and this belonging. And this is why we see so much virtue signaling. It's like, I matter, I'm part of the herd, I'm going to go along with the current thing. And on a subconscious level, it's just this need to be the same as other people, and this fear of popping your head out of the parapet and getting shot. And that is what stops most people from speaking up, from doing, when I say speaking up, I don't just mean with voice or posting things online. I mean, we speak, we express with our actions, with our thoughts, with everything. And so going against the herd, going against the majority, whether it's speaking up or not wearing a mask or not doing this, that is truly terrifying for many people. In fact, in my experience, it's our greatest fear, what others think, doing so many things.
Well, I want to focus on this because I've been looking for commonality of people who are going their own way. And we mentioned this early on. First of all, I don't think they're posse people. I think they're observers. I think they've got great, they figure out a way to work. Like I worked with entrepreneurs my entire life, and the people I worked with, they were always trying to keep the government away from them. It was there, but they were trying to keep them away, and they were always independent. It was like their independence. They said, "You do whatever you want, just don't step on, like, come into my area." One of the things which I think is very frightening is if anybody hasn't read the Bitterman coercion chart, which was the study of Korean vets who came back who were pro-Chinese and communist because they used a structure to win them over. What's happened in the last 2 years is exactly the Bitterman chart, where right now they're loosening up and making you feel some freedom, but you also know they have the ability to step back and like completely just like take control.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just it's frightening that there's nothing new. Like when you watch movies, it's all the same movies now. It's like if you go into history, for example, people who don't know history, they're doomed. They're doomed to repeat it. Hitler was able to go and eventually get Jews to go on cattle cars and die because he created the Gesundheit pass. They said there were typhoid outbreaks in these Jewish areas, or Jews were more likely to get typhoid, so they gave papers. There's nothing new under the sun. It's just the history that people haven't studied. Now that you're awake, would you ever go back? Would you be Cypher from Matrix? Now that you're awake to your life, being present, that's really what awake to is I'm present to you talking to me. I'm not thinking tomorrow, I'm present. That's really what I realized my materialism was. I was never present. Now that you're present to your own life, awake, would you ever go back? Has it been boring?
I could never go back. And I wouldn't want to. Like, I just see life as this amazing journey. Like, I'm here in this body for this particular lifetime. And I think the reason we're here is to fully experience it. And I don't believe in changing the past, because then I wouldn't be where I am now.
Yeah.
And I can't control the future. I can only control me and how I show up and what I do. And so, as you said, living presently is one of the most critical things that we can learn to do, because when we're worrying about or lamenting about the past, or we're thinking about the future constantly, I'm not saying we don't, plan and think, but when we're constantly embroiled in future and past, and we're not present to actually experiencing life. And this is the world over, and I think that for me, that's been one of the most powerful things, is really learning to let go of attachments, let go of the past, forgive, just, let that heavy weight go, and think about the future sometimes, but not be living in it, because you're living in something.
Don't be committed to the way. Don't.
Yeah, you're just imagining. Yeah, like, oh, this is going to happen, or that's going to happen, or what's going to happen. And then everyone gets into a panic, worrying about what may or may not happen. Most of what you worry about doesn't ever happen anyway. And even if it does, you have to learn to have the self-belief and the self-trust that you will just be able to navigate it. I think part of our reason why we worry about the future or what's going to happen next, what are they going to do, you know, all of this stuff, is that we don't trust ourselves that we will just be able to deal with it.
The best saying that I ever heard was, God never gives you anything you can't handle.
Yeah.
And it's true. Like whatever difficulties we've had, I don't think that we have anything that we can't handle, and we're much stronger and greater than we ever thought we were. I just want to share, as a writer, Laura, I'm always like looking how I'm going to start something, you know, how I'm going to grab them. And when I wrote my last book, like I was struggling because I didn't have the phrase, because I was benchmarking myself to the greatest phrase for an opening of book from Charles Dickens, from your country, The Tale of Two Cities, which is talking about great upheaval. And he said it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. And that's how I look at it. I wouldn't want to go back to sleep, because right now we're having this conversation. We would never have this conversation before. You would have stayed in your life, in your lane, in my lane. And the people I talk to now, there's like people who are awakened on Team Humanity, and there's other people who I hope that, you know, I hope that they can come and see, but I don't need them. I'm not apostatizing, and none of us can, because in the Quran, Muhammad says there's no coercion in spirituality. I can't make anyone do anything. They'll hate me and they'll blame me.
That's I love what you just said there. Well, I just want to build on what you just said there, because I think, you know, this idea of we can have a desire to help others. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, it's in our human nature to want to kind of serve and to be part of something and to help others. I think what's important is that, as you just said, we don't have a need to do it. And there is a distinction, and this is where a lot of people's stress and anguish comes from. I always, you know, use the analogy of a lighthouse. I say, be the lighthouse. So the lighthouse is solid, grounded, and is just shining. And it's just shining. And the boats will either see it or they will not see it. But the lighthouse doesn't kind of go trying to find all of the different people and like get the, there is a very different intention and energy. It comes from a very different place. I think when we're coming from the heart, when we're coming from more of a soul level, and we're just, you know, we're just living and sharing in a way that is, you know, that we're just passionate about, and it's coming from that place of love.
Yeah.
And accepting and understanding that whoever is going to receive that and be drawn to that will be, and that's great. And you will have an impact regardless. You may not even know the impact, but you just trust, you have the faith that if you show up fully, the more you show up, the more light you shine, you are impacting people without having the need to wake other people up. So this is where a lot of the frustration in my community comes from. And the phrase I hear a lot is, I'm stressed because other people aren't waking up. I need to make my family wake up, and they're just going on and on and on at their family, and it's creating all these issues. That's where acceptance comes in. You can only control you. So do the best you can do, and question why are you so desperate for people to wake up? Because I tell you, it comes from trauma. The desperation for others to wake up it's fear, it's trauma, we are so worried that if everyone doesn't wake up and do something, then the world is going to end and we're just going to be, you know, in misery and we're not going to be able to cope and all of this stuff. That's when you really start drilling. People aren't aware of that, but when you really start drilling down and you get to the roots, it's ultimately about fear. It all kind of comes back to fear and needing to control everyone else. And I say, well, you don't need 8 billion people to be awake. And even if 8 billion people were awake, if they're not actually active, then it doesn't really make much difference. What makes a difference is us. And as you said earlier, we are so powerful as individuals, but when we get together as well, when we connect with each other, that power multiplies. And everything is energy. As Nikola Tesla said, everything is energy, frequency, and vibration. This is why when there are mass meditations, the energy can be measured. It's amazing. It's super powerful. You know, there's been experiments done where hundreds of people have meditated in a town. I can't remember the name, the one I'm thinking of.
Back in the Israeli-Lebanese war, there were like 2,000 transcendental meditation. They went there and there was like no war and there was no killing, and it's like, you know, and then when they left, it erupted again. The people,
there's been loads of examples of that, lots of kind of experiments done and initiatives done where, you know, that they'll do that, and then crime that weekend in that town will go down by 50%, like 40-50%. I mean, it's incredible, and it proves, you know, what we already know, which is everything is energy. Just by our thoughts, we can't see it. I think this is the challenge for a lot of people. We can't see it. We can only see the tiniest fraction of what is there, you know, like a radio station. You know, you've got all these different frequencies and you tune the radio. Well, what creates the different channels is just the different frequency that it's tuned into. That's all around us at all times.
You want to become a
CB.
You want to become a CB, so you can also communicate back to it instead of just being receptive.
Yeah, but it's just everything is energy, and it's so powerful. And you know, I saw this and experienced this on a kind of collective sort of group level recently. I went to a 1-week retreat, and we were doing hours of meditation each day, and healing. That a lot of the people that attend, maybe about 10% of the people that attend are experiencing really serious illness that happen.
I fully agree, because now they have technology that just verifies what we already know. So they've got technology that they could see your aura and my aura, and if they are repulsing each other, they would be able to, you know, look at it and say these two people didn't get along. They could actually look at an aura that's unhealthy, and from that they could actually tell whether someone was going to get sick and die, and they could tell someone who was radiating health. So one of the things that I want to ask if you're seeing the same thing or come to the same understanding. We're told what's going to happen to us. This is a magical world. They can't do it. Nothing can happen to us without our consent. Nobody I know participated without giving their consent. They were fearful. The most radical example of this would be during the First World War. Anybody who ran over the foxhole would be shot. But these people, they chose to do it because they were frightened that they would be shot by their own officers. But by doing that, they gave their consent to sacrifice themselves. And this is really what it is. It's the lower energies that bring us down. So they tell us what to do. I regularly say out loud to myself, I do not give my consent. I just say that. It's like, and I walk around with a bubble around me. I do not give my consent. I also find for myself, I read Psalms 23 because it almost like says, like, I'm pushing it away. This is my bubble. I'm not participating. And I believe more people have to understand that, right? Like, you don't give your consent because it's almost like you willingly sacrifice yourself. And most people, again, you mentioned fear. There was a book I read in 2011, It was called The Fear of the End. I can't remember the exact. It starts off where this professor has a student come to him, and she says, "Why should I even write this paper? Because the Mayan calendar is coming to the end, and you're right near, where the Mayans were, right? Like that's Tulum, and
Yep.
I can't pronounce
Yep.
the other one. Chicken. I can never pronounce it. The big one, the one with the big pyramid.
I always forget the name of it.
Chip and
Chichenista, I think, something like that. Yep.
Well, I just had a senior moment. What was I saying? Well,
it will pop back. I do that all the time. The number of times I'm mid-flow, literally mid-conversation, and I just go, what was I saying?
Yeah, it's okay. I remember. Thank you. So I read this book. And this is before the Mayan calendar was turning. The world's going to end. Everything. So here's this professor. He tells the story of a student who comes and says, "Why should he even write a paper? The world's ending." She believed it. And what he did is he looked at all these stories about the world ending, and he came to a really interesting conclusion that I would agree with. He says, "Laura, you came into the world when you came into the world. That's when it began. You're going to leave the world when you leave, and that's when the world ends, or your perspective of the world, or your individuality in the sea of consciousness, or of infinite." Yep. And the fear is about, they're going to do this and that. It really comes down to fear of death. And that goes back to how they were able to control people, because people were so scared of death, they never really lived. And I remember one of the individuals who actually really manipulated this to the ninth degree was Saul Alinsky in his two books, Reveille for Radicals and Rules for Radicals, which Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton and all of them implement. And he shared that you scare people, and the fear is so much worse than the reality. There's so many people I don't talk to. It's like, this is wonderful. Like my cup is empty now. That means I can actually have the conversation with you, and I don't have to worry about these people. And you and I met on LinkedIn. Oh, if you saw the people on my LinkedIn from my old world, they keep on talking as if the world's going back to normal. Like they're still, and I'm sitting there going like, you guys are like, and I have to not be judgmental, because I understand where it's coming, but I can't help it. You're still talking about that.
Yeah.
Like it's gonna go back. I'll give you an example. I have friends who are the top insurance salesmen in Canada. Well, anybody who reads the numbers know that no one's ever going to get paid. The companies are go bankrupt. That's like out there, but they're going out and they're trying to sell people. And and I'm not going to even explain it anymore. I'm just not going to participate in it.
Yeah.
Because that's the number one thing I ask myself, and it's selfish. I'm awake out of selfish reasons. I say, I'm not going to screw you over, Laura, because it doesn't make me feel good. Because what I do to you, it's just a mirror to myself. But I want to leave a metaphor. Because this is the metaphor I look at. I don't know if you ever heard of the two waves.
The what?
In the ocean. The two waves in the ocean.
Possibly. Go on.
There's two waves, or there's a bunch of waves, but there's one wave who is crying. And the other wave says, "Why are you crying?" It says, "Don't you see those rocks? We're going to hit those rocks and we're no longer going to be waves." And the other one's really calm and turns to the wave that's crying and says, "Yes, we'll no longer be waves, but we'll still be part of the ocean, which is vast and infinite." And that's how we have to look at this individuality. It's an illusion. And in the higher level would understand whatever I do to you, I do to me. I know what projection is. I remember I learned it very well. I had a friend who was bald, and I'm not like the most, have the most hair in my life. But he would constantly look at people's hairlines. It was his issue. It wasn't my issue, but it was his issue. And that's what we do. The things I like in a person, I'm really finding something that I like in myself, or a kernel that I could be. And people I don't like, I have to also take it back in ownership and say, what is it about me that Laura is making me feel uncomfortable? It's got nothing to do with you. It only has anything to do with you if I have this illusion or delusion and you invite it into your life, then it's your problem. If you don't have a problem, it ain't your problem. And I want to share something. When I got divorced, I went to this older gentleman, and he said to me, Peter, people are going to talk about you. It's what they need to do. It's none of your business. Why are you paying attention to their conversation? It's like when you're in high school and people start talking about you. It's like all they're doing is like they haven't put in the filters that maybe they shouldn't talk about, but they're trying to work out those situations for themselves, like movies. So everybody, it's never personal unless someone holds a gun to you and going to take your life. So if your friends, family, whatever, turn on you, it's because it's fear-based. And just to be open, and I applaud you what you're doing, because a lot of people who see themselves as being awake, because I don't know what awakening is. I just know that I'm flawed. I think that's what awaken means to me. I'm a terribly flawed human being. And I love it. I wouldn't want to be anything else. You don't have to have a planned route. You just need to know that you want to have full experiences. And to be around people who elevate rather than deflate.
Of course.
So how did I live today?
Exactly. I mean, ultimately, that's all that matters. You know, when you strip away, again, it's all of this stuff comes from conditioning. It's all just our conditioning. This idea that we, you know, all these fears that we have, we're not born with these fears. You know, we have all these fears that we develop. We have all these attachments, as you were speaking about, all the kind of ego stuff, the status. You know, we worry about what will happen with that. You know, there are just so many things that limit us and cause us to really not fully live. And all that matters in my mind, in my heart, is to fully live. Just to embrace it all and know that you can just navigate it, and you never know what's going to happen. And
it's a lot easier to say that than actually someone willing to experience.
Of course, and that's the work. And that's why it requires work. It requires a lot of, you know, willingness to look within and to do that work. And I always say it's a journey. It's not a course that you do. It's not, you know, a quick fix, which is what most people want, which is why they just, you know, most people will numb themselves and distract themselves with addictions, because it's just too difficult. It's too much work to actually, you know, face this stuff and address this stuff. It's just easier just to kind of, you know, distract and numb. And we're seeing a lot of that. Yeah.
To be an adult. Because I think the problem is people want to deflect to the nanny state, to someone else to make decision, the boss, everyone, in thinking that they have a hotline to God, which they don't. Like, you know, Bill Gates is no different than you and I, but people, you know, start behaving that way. I used the business I was very focused. I would deal with, you know, several billionaires. The problem is that no one would ever like have a real conversation with them. They would go, "Oh, look what you have," and then they would say, "Well, I only make them $50,000. That would take me like 3,000 lifetimes to be where you are." And it's like, it's just a human person. They can only be with one person at a time. They can only sleep in one bed and one pair of shoes, and then they all go back to the same place. If anybody reads Psalm 49, it says the wealthy and the poor and the beast, they go to the same place, and it's like there's no ransom for a life. So what life did you live? And it's read after someone passes, and it's read to actually remind people that you have to live now. And unfortunately, so many people aren't living. But it's not your place or my place to make them live. Can't give them a life that they're not prepared to give themselves.
No,
however, those who actually do want to have it, I would want to go to someone like yourself who's gone on the journey. I would ask, how did you deal with your terrible nervous breakdown where you thought you were like, you know, that you were crazy? Because like once all this stuff starts floating into your head, you can't immediately, it's overwhelming. And I went through it in probably 1992, but I started researching not on alternative like governments and things like that, but neurolinguistic programming, physics, typologies, all that stuff. And I was looking at things differently, and it was overwhelming. It was like taking like a trillion volts and putting it through your system. And that's where joining, going to you and just being a voice that people can speak to, joining your groups where they can actually meet other people to create that synergy, that synchronicity, that creativity where you actually are building. I liken it to two types of way of looking at the world. You're either a finite game player or an infinite game player. And just to share with you how I look at that is a finite game player. If we were playing volleyball, do they play volleyball in England?
When I was in school, yes.
So there's people who just want to spike the ball and win. That's a finite game player. An infinite game player is someone who wants a volley and bring other people in, not knowing where it's going to go. Just knowing. Yeah. When I look at business relationships, any relationships, I ask myself several questions. One, can I trust the person? Well, what does trust really mean to me? You're doing the best you can with what you can do. And you're also trying to walk lightly on the earth. So that's where trust is, where you know that you're trying. And then number two, you want to better yourself. Wherever you are here, you want to be someone. And lastly, does the person care about you? Well, if someone hasn't taken care of themselves, they can't have any empathy or care for anyone else. And it's just really simple. But you're going to live really like this. I shared with you this before. Patrick Moore, who was one of the founders of Greenpeace. I spoke with him, and he's such a beautiful man. And I spoke to him because I wanted to know how he survived being attacked by people who were his friends and family and colleagues, because he's the only scientist who started Greenpeace, and he's the only person who's actually out in the wilderness because he comes from 3 generations of loggers. If they cut down all the trees, they would have no business. And it was about stewardship rather than saying human beings were viruses. And I said, Patrick, how did you survive? He says, I follow my intuition. I learned to trust. Yes, everything I read just validates what I already know. When you pick up the cell phone and you call me or we're on this, it's us duplicating which was innate within us. And the thing is, many people need trust. And if you're a writer, like of novels, the purpose of a story is everything external that happens to actually solve a question or a crisis within. It's all out there to make you stronger. Here's the analogy that I have, and this might be helpful to you, Laura, and it might not be. And if it's good, use it. And I say this everyone, or get rid of it, because that's empowerment. I looked at myself as being in a lake, and I was paddling, doggy paddling, and everybody else is paddling. And they're just doing it, and they're doing their circles, and we're about a mile, 2 miles away. So there's no way if we paddle, we're even going to get there. We're going to drown. Beautiful sunny day out. Everyone's paddling. I decide I'm just going to let go. I'm just going to lean back, and I'm going to just let the sun in and enjoy the moment. And maybe a current will come and I'll end up going to shore. But for sure, if I keep on paddling, I'm going to exhaust myself and I'm going to drown. And I'm never going to enjoy the beautiful sun on my face. And that's the analogy. I have that picture where I'm just floating and I don't even notice anybody anymore. And I have no reason to tell these people because they need the paddle.
Yeah.
And if I tell them and it goes against their worldview, how they see the world, they might have an invested interest to pull me in. And you don't want to be, because my delusions are only your problem if you choose them to be your problem.
Yep.
And you have free choice. The free choice is you're going to participate in my toxic ways, or you choose not to. You can still give people love.
Yeah.
So
I love that.
How can people find you and join your groups and get your coaching? And what type of programs?
I love what I do. No, I do. It's I mean, I have this membership community called The Shift. And it's all about the inner shift and how we kind of navigate these times. And so that's really cool, because it's a community of people. So it's not just one of these things where you just sign up and pay to receive exclusive content. You get that, but then you also have the community element, and we have live calls every month, and people really love that. It's like being around other people who kind of get you, like they're on the same path. And I know there are many people in that community who don't have anyone really in person, because ideally we would have all these people around us and all these great connections in person. But having gone through this last 2.5 years, many people are finding themselves feeling quite isolated and alone, because all the people they were friends with are just not on the same page anymore. So yeah, it's a way of having community, but also learning through teachings that I share, how we can navigate all of this stuff and really kind of reclaim our inner power and our inner freedom. So that's the community. And then there's one-on-one coaching and group program coming up, because generally people are good people, and we all generally want to be able to help each other when we can. And so yeah, I just want people to know, whatever situation they're in, you can always improve it. Like you can always shift out of the patterns that you're in. You can always reclaim your power. You can raise your consciousness. There's so much that you can do, and you can really genuinely get to a point, which is where I've got to, where I experience so much inner freedom. Ironically, I feel freer now in this current climate than I have ever done in the past.